We're going to begin shortly with First Minister's questions, but before I do, today marks a 3-weekly review of the lockdown restrictions, and I believe the First Minister would like to make a slightly longer statement than normal. First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is required by law to review lockdown restrictions every 3 weeks, and as you say, the latest review falls due today, and I'll shortly give an update on the decisions we have reached. I'll set out why we are not yet able to move to phase 4 of the route map out of lockdown. I'll confirm that in light of the recent increase in cases of COVID, and because it must still be our aim to keep prevalence of the virus as low as possible, we've taken the precautionary decision to pause some changes that we had previously scheduled for slightly later this month. I'll also announce a tightening and extension of some existing restrictions and rules as part of our efforts to slow the rise in cases as we enter winter. And I'll confirm that Protect Scotland, the significant enhancement of Test and Protect that I signalled in the programme for government, is now up and running. First, though, I will report on today's statistics. Since yesterday, an additional 161 cases have been confirmed. That represents 1.9% of people newly tested and takes the total number of cases to 22,039. 65 of today's cases are in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, 46 in Lanarkshire, 12 in Lothian and 8 in Ayrshire and Arran. The remaining 30 are spread across 8 different health board areas. A total of 266 patients are currently in hospital with COVID, which is 8 fewer than yesterday. As of last night, 7 people were in intensive care, which is 1 more than yesterday. In the past 24 hours, no deaths were registered of patients who had been confirmed as having the virus, and the total number of deaths under that measurement therefore remains 2,499. I want to send again my condolences to everyone who has lost a loved one to this illness. Let me turn now to the review of lockdown restrictions. As I indicated a moment ago, it is not possible at this stage to indicate a move from phase 3 to phase 4 of the route map out of lockdown. I can therefore confirm that we will remain in phase 3 for now, and it's also important to stress that that is likely to be the case for some time yet. For us to move to phase 4, we must be satisfied, and I quote, "The virus is no longer considered a significant threat to public health." As is obvious from the figures I've reported in recent days, and as has been confirmed to me in advice from the Chief Medical Officer, this is definitely not the case. When we reviewed lockdown measures 6 weeks ago, we had recorded 14 new cases a day on average over the previous week. 3 weeks ago, that average daily rate had risen to 52 new cases a day, and in the 7 days up to yesterday, the average daily rate was 155. Our latest estimate of the R number is that it is now above 1, possibly as high as 1.5. Over the past week, we have also had to impose additional restrictions on people living in 5 local authority areas in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Glasgow City, East and West Dunbartonshire, Renfrewshire and East Renfrewshire. So rather than the threat to public health receding, the pandemic is at this stage accelerating again, albeit and thankfully from a low base and not as rapidly as it was back in March and April. It is worth stressing that this position is not entirely unexpected. In recent weeks, we have reopened significant parts of our economy. Though many will be operating below full capacity, approximately 96% of businesses in Scotland are now trading again. Children have gone back to school, and we've eased many social, leisure and travel restrictions. People are meeting up more, going out more and travelling more, and all of that is positive. But as we released ourselves from lockdown, we also released the virus. We gave it more opportunities to spread, and so it was always likely that we would see a rise in cases. Indeed, the reason we focused so firmly over the summer on suppressing the virus was to ensure that any increase was from a low base and to give our Test and Protect teams the best possible chance of keeping outbreaks under control. And it is important, even in a period of rising cases, that we don't lose sight of that objective to keep infection levels as low as possible. That approach has been important. Since late July, for example, Spain's weekly level of new cases per 100,000 of population has increased from 34 to 126. France's has risen from 11 to 60. Scotland's rate has increased from 2 to just under 20. So we have come out of the summer with a relatively low prevalence of the virus. And of course, without Test and Protect, as well as the efforts of so many across the country, the virus would already have spread considerably further and faster. So I'm very grateful to everyone for the collective effort so far. It has made a difference. But cases are now rising again, and we can see by looking around Britain, Europe and the rest of the world just how difficult it is to keep the virus under control when globally the pandemic is still accelerating. Even New Zealand, which at one stage reached zero COVID, has now reimposed some restrictions. In Scotland, having ensured the reopening of schools, we are now welcoming students back to our colleges and universities. That is a necessary and positive development, but because it involves people moving around the country and mixing, it undoubtedly brings further risks. One point that is frequently commented on just now is that the recent rise in cases has not been mirrored by an equally large rise in hospital admissions or deaths. That may partly reflect the fact that many of the new cases we are seeing are among younger people. But although that can provide some comfort, it should not and must not lead to complacency. Although COVID kills relatively few younger people, we know it can still be harmful to their health. It is not a virus anyone should be relaxed about getting. In addition, if COVID spreads too widely in the younger, healthier parts of the population, it will inevitably reach older and more vulnerable people. That could then lead to an increase in hospital admissions and fatalities, as we are seeing now to some extent in countries such as France. And it is also worth noting that although numbers here are still low, we have seen a rise in hospital admissions in Scotland over the past couple of weeks. However, Presiding Officer, let me make this point very clear. I understand how hard this is for everybody, but perhaps for young people in particular, and it is not their fault. Younger adults are more likely to work in public-facing jobs, more likely to have to use public transport and more likely to live in shared accommodation. That is simply a fact of life for so many young people in our society, but it also makes it more likely that they will be exposed to the virus, and so all the more important that we stress the ways in which they can protect themselves and protect others. Presiding Officer, taking account of all of the most up-to-date information we have, I can confirm that it is the Scottish Government's judgment that we cannot at this stage risk the new opportunities for transmission of COVID that reopening further services and facilities would entail. In my statement on 20th August, I set out several changes that were provisionally scheduled for 14th September. Of course, I stressed then that, and I'm quoting, given the volatility we face in transmission of the virus, there is a very real possibility that some or all of these plans could change. Unfortunately, due to the rise in cases we have seen since then, we have concluded that these changes must be paused for a further 3 weeks. The new indicative date for their resumption is Monday the 5th of October. However, I must stress again that this remains an indicative date. A final decision can only be taken much nearer the time. That means, unfortunately, that spectators will not be able to return to sports stadia and other venues over the next 3 weeks. There are 2 pilot events due to take place this weekend, which will proceed. However, after that, we will judge possible pilot events on a case-by-case basis and in light of the latest COVID data. The other services and venues affected by this pause are theatres, live music venues, indoor soft play facilities and indoor contact sports activities for people aged 12 and over. In addition, outdoor events that have not yet been given the green light, such as those where a lot of people stand close together, cannot yet restart. I will give an update on funerals and weddings later on in my statement. Now, I'm well aware that for people who work in the sectors affected by today's pause, this is a very hard message to hear. I know how long you have waited to start up again or to resume more of your activities, and I know, because I have seen this in so many sectors, how much work you have put into plans for safe reopening. And I know the impact of continued closure. So I want to stress that this decision to delay the indicative date by 3 weeks has not been taken lightly. But right now, given the rise in cases, it is the only responsible decision we can reach. For the same reason, the reopening of call centres and offices where staff are still working from home will be reviewed again on the 1st of October, but will definitely not take place before then. For now, working from home will remain the default position. Again, I am aware of the impact of long-term home working on many businesses and employees, and also on shops, cafes and bars, which normally attract trade from office workers. We are currently working with partners, including the Scottish Chambers of Commerce and the STUC, to plan for a safe, phased reopening of these remaining offices when circumstances allow. That planning will inform future route map review decisions. However, at this stage, A full return to office working, which would substantially increase the number of people meeting indoors and travelling together on buses and trains, would risk a significant acceleration of COVID transmission. Finally, before I move on to further measures we deem necessary to reduce the spread of the virus, let me say a few words to those in the shielding category. We will continue to provide as much information and advice as possible. In fact, if you are registered with the shielding SMS service and live in areas where there have been local outbreaks, such as Aberdeen or Glasgow, you will have received text messages alerting you to changes in local advice. We've also published a guide on the mygov.scot website, which suggests simple things you can do to lower your risk of exposure. And you will receive an update letter soon from the Chief Medical Officer. We understand that the recent rise in cases will cause concern. However, at this stage, we do not plan to reintroduce shielding. Instead, we will continue to give you the information you need to help you stay safe. Presiding Officer, in addition to pausing the reopenings that had been planned for later this month, we have concluded that it is necessary to tighten some existing restrictions to help curb the spread of the virus, especially between and within households. As of now, up to 8 people from 3 households can meet indoors. Larger outdoor gatherings are also permitted. I can confirm that we intend to change this so that a maximum of 6 people from 2 households will now be permitted to meet together. To help reduce transmission, but also to simplify the rules as much as possible, this new limit will apply both indoors, in houses, pubs and restaurants, and also outdoors, including in private gardens. There will be some limited exceptions, for example, for organised sports and places of worship. Also, any children under 12 who are part of 2 households meeting up won't count towards the limit of 6 people. And lastly, given the importance of these life events and the distress caused by not being able to mark them, we intend to allow a limited exception for funerals, weddings and civil partnerships. Already up to 20 people can attend ceremonies for these occasions, and we intend to retain that limit for now. However, from Monday, that limit of 20 will also be permitted for wakes and receptions, as long as they take place in regulated venues like hotels with strict guidance in place. I know that many have called for greater consistency in the arrangements for ceremonies and receptions, and so I hope this will help deliver that. I'm asking people to abide by these stricter new limits on gatherings immediately. However, the regulations that will give legal effect to them will come into force on Monday, and more detail will, of course, be available on the Scottish Government website. And, of course, for now, for people living in Glasgow, East or West Dunbartonshire, Renfrewshire and East Renfrewshire, the advice is not to visit other households at all. Let me also re-emphasise that the new limit of 6 people from 2 households will also apply in restaurants, pubs and beer gardens, as well as in our homes. We hope that by reducing the risk of transmission in those settings, it will help to keep the sector open. However, I can confirm that we have decided to implement 2 additional measures to reduce the risk of transmission in the hospitality sector. First, we intend to make it mandatory for customers in hospitality premises to wear face coverings whenever they are moving around and not eating or drinking, for example, when entering and going to a table or to the bathroom. And second, subject to some exemptions, we will also make it mandatory, rather than simply in guidance, for staff working in hospitality premises to also wear face coverings. The hospitality industry has put a lot of effort into creating safe spaces for people to meet, and we hope these additional protections will help ensure that the sector can remain open with high levels of compliance. Presiding Officer, I'm aware that the announcements I've made so far are hard for people to hear. After 6 long, hard months, we are still asking the public to make a lot of difficult sacrifices. That is unavoidable given the nature of the challenge we face. However, I want to be clear that while we still face a battle to get and keep COVID under control, we are in a stronger position than earlier in the year. Test and Protect is working well and now taking a lot of the strain. Without it, the virus would be spreading further and faster, and we would require to apply much stricter lockdown measures again. And today, a significant enhancement of Test and Protect has gone live. The Protect Scotland contact tracing app is now available for download and use. The app does not replace our current Test and Protect system, it adds to it. The work of our teams on the ground, interviewing people who have tested positive, getting in touch with close contacts and making recommendations based on the information they gather, will remain the cornerstone of our approach to controlling outbreaks. However, the app is an important addition to the work of those teams. If you download it, you will receive a notification if someone you have been in close proximity to tells the app that they have tested positive. It will be particularly useful for settings such as public transport, where we tend to spend time in close proximity to people we don't know, and it will also be very valuable as students arrive back at university or college for the new term. The app is available now from the Apple and Google Play app stores, and more information is available on the new protect.scot website. The app operates anonymously and confidentially, and the simple fact is that the more of us who download and use it, the more effective it and Test and Protect overall will be in helping us beat COVID. So I encourage everyone to download it today and spread the word to all of your friends and family. This is a simple but very powerful thing all of us can do as individual citizens to help protect Scotland as a whole. Presiding Officer, the pause in our route map and the new restrictions I have outlined today are not welcome. I know that. The Scottish Government did not want to have to impose them, but they are necessary. And they reflect the fact that Scotland, like the rest of the UK, Europe and the world, is currently in a very precarious position. However, notwithstanding that, as I said a moment ago, we are in a much better position than in late March. Prevalence of the virus is lower thanks to the individual sacrifices that so many of you have made for the greater good. We are seeing a rise in new cases, but it is not as rapid as it was earlier in the year. And Test and Protect is working well. It is allowing us, even with a rise in cases, to live much more normally than we were able to do under lockdown. So we still have grounds for cautious hope and optimism, but we have no grounds whatsoever for complacency. It is vital to do everything we can to stop cases rising further before winter. That is the reason for the decisions I've outlined today. These steps are necessary to help curb a virus that we know spreads rapidly whenever it gets the chance. Of course, the success of these measures depends on all of us. This is still by necessity a collective effort. After all, while government actions like testing and contact tracing have a significant role to play, the virus unfortunately doesn't respond to government instruction. It thrives or dies according to how people behave. It spreads when we give it opportunities to do so, and it goes into retreat when we deny it those opportunities. And although none of us can guarantee that we won't get or spread the virus, and it is not our fault when we do, it is after all highly infectious, we can all do our bit to reduce the chances of that happening. I know that making these choices, keeping our distance from friends, staying in small groups, washing our hands regularly, these things all get harder and much more tiresome as time passes, but they are more important now than they have been for months. And the best way of remembering the key choices we all must make, of course, is facts. These are the rules that will help us to protect ourselves, our families and communities and the NHS. And ultimately, they will help us save lives. We should not lose sight of that. So face coverings should be worn in enclosed spaces, avoid crowded areas, clean your hands regularly and thoroughly, and clean hard surfaces after touching them. 2-metre distancing remains our clear advice, and self-isolate and book a test immediately if you have symptoms of COVID. Those symptoms, of course, are a new cough, a fever, or a loss of or change in your sense of taste or smell. Keeping to those basic rules is not easy, but it remains the best way of expressing our care for and our solidarity with each other. My thanks once again to everyone across Scotland for your patience and for continuing to make these hard sacrifices for the sake of the people you love and for the sake of the country as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you, First Minister. The First Minister will now take questions. I would just remind members that I'm going to take all supplementary questions at the end, that is today after question 7 from Polly McNeill. First question, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and to the First Minister for advance notice of her statement. The sobering news here in Scotland and across the rest of the UK over the last few days has been a reality check for anyone who thought that the pandemic was on its way out. It is clear that while we can still hope for further progress to be made over the rest of this year, there will be no swift return to normality. We all recognise the importance of sticking by the rules, of washing our hands, of socially distancing and doing our bit. And it's down to each and every one of us, and each and every one of us will benefit if we do. Last night, the new Scottish contact tracing app was launched. Experts at University College London have said that the uptake of such an app would need to be between 56% and 95% for it to be successful. and reaching those numbers will take a momentous effort. This morning I, along with thousands of Scots, did my bit and downloaded it to my phone, and I've no doubt that the First Minister did too. But there are many people across Scotland who don't regularly use apps and perhaps aren't as addicted to their phones as the First Minister and I. So can I ask what is being done to ensure that everybody, including the hardest to reach, are being helped in adopting this new technology?
First Minister.
Can I thank Ruth Davison for her question? Can I also thank her for personally downloading the app and also taking the opportunity today to encourage others to do so. I would appeal to members across the chamber to follow that example. This is not political in any way. All of us have a duty to ask our fellow citizens to do the right thing. Uptake, of course, is important, which is why it is so vital that we do encourage people to download it. There are other views about whether you need to reach a specific percentage. I take the view that the higher the better, but the more people that sign up, the better. Everybody who signs up is making a contribution. When I left my office to come to the chamber, the download number had just passed 150,000, which after a few hours I think is really good progress. I hope to see it rise further over the course of the next few days. There will be from tomorrow a major advertising campaign to back it. The point about those who don't routinely use smartphones is an important one, and it is for that reason, amongst other reasons, that we decided not to base our entire Test and Protect system on a proximity tracing app. We've built it from the bottom up using tried and tested approaches in our public health teams, and the app is an enhancement to that. So if you don't have a phone or if you don't use the app, you will not be missed from our Test and Protect system. Everybody who tests positive, notwithstanding the app, will still be contacted by a contact tracer and their contacts details of those who've been in contact with taken. The app adds to that system, and I think it's really important to recognise that. The real value of the app is that it will help us notify close contacts of positive cases that are not known to the person who has tested positive. Somebody that they've sat close to on a bus or a train, or somebody that they might have sat close to in a pub or a restaurant. So that is the importance of the enhancement. Test and Protect is working well. I say that with not a shred of complacency. The most up-to-date figures on its performance were published by Public Health Scotland yesterday. Still, at this stage, well over 90% of index cases are being contacted and over 90% of close contacts are being contacted. So it's working well. This is an important enhancement, and I hope all of us get fully behind it.
Ruth Davison.
I thank the First Minister for that response, and we all hope that the app works successfully. But what we're also learning as we go on through this is that to get ahead of the virus, we must fight it across all fronts, and testing is at the heart of that. And at present, even with the increase in testing the First Minister has outlined, her strategy focuses on symptomatic cases, on surveillance and on the sick and high risk. And she made no mention in her statement today on wider community testing. So can she say today whether the current position is going to be the long-term one for the country, or is it a staging post towards mass community testing?
First Minister.
We are working with the UK Government to try to advance mass community testing. The Prime Minister spoke about the work the UK Government is doing yesterday. We are engaging with them in that, as the UK Government is being frank about. Not all of that technology currently exists in a developed enough form, so there's a lot of work there to do to make testing available on a mass scale and in a way that is rapid and easily accessible. But we continue to build, again in partnership with the UK, the capacity of our current testing system. Our approach to testing is set out in our current testing strategy. We keep that under constant review. There are some categories of people where we test regardless of symptoms. So care home workers are tested every week, whether or not they have symptoms. There are categories of patients admitted to hospital, and also categories of staff working in our hospitals who are tested routinely as well. And of course, people working in our education system can access testing if they believe they may have been exposed to the virus. Other than that, our advice to people, and it's really important advice, is that you should access testing if you have one of the symptoms of COVID that we regularly remind people of. We have seen over recent weeks that testing in Scotland has increased rapidly and substantially. The most recent figures that can be accessed comparing across the UK would show that we are testing proportionately more people than per head of population. But this is something that we work with the UK Government on, and will continue to do so as we develop capacity, but also develop the approaches we take to testing in line with our learning about the virus.
Ruth Davison.
Thank you. I accept that the technology on community testing is complex and may not quite be there yet, but we have seen experts such as Professor José Vázquez Boland, the Chairman of Infectious Diseases at Edinburgh University, and Professor Hugh Pennington explain that we need more than the current measures if we're going to eradicate COVID-19, and identifying the asymptomatic through mass testing is a really important tool to do so. So the First Minister says that she's working with the UK Government towards mass testing. I think that's really positive, but I was wondering if she was able to give a bit more information on how she hopes this will be achieved and if she has any timescales for the public to be informed about that.
First Minister.
We'll keep the public informed on an ongoing basis. We have published in recent weeks our testing strategy. That's available on the Scottish Government website. That is kept under review. I am a firm believer in, if you like, a twin-track approach here. I think we have to focus on the future, and we have to commit to trying to develop approaches, even if they are not yet fully developed, to be implemented now. And I think that is the right approach to developing not just mass testing, but mass rapid testing. But we've also got to focus on the fundamentals right now of making sure that our current approach to testing can be properly implemented. That's why the development and launch today of Protect Scotland is so important, and why we haven't initially decided not to have a Scotland-specific app, decided to do it when we saw the success of the one on which ours is based in the Republic of Ireland and more recently in Northern Ireland. So we will focus on the here and now, making sure that people who need testing get access to that testing quickly. The testing system largely is within a UK-wide network, so we require to work with the UK Government to make sure that we can access that appropriately for Scotland, and we're doing that. But we will also look to develop new approaches in the future as soon as the technology and our ability to implement that is where we need it to be.
Ruth Davis.
Everyone is in agreement on the importance of testing within the suite of tools that are at our disposal. So could I ask the First Minister about a very specific aspect of the testing regime? We found out yesterday that only 5% of those people who are coming into our airports have been contacted by the National Contact Tracing Centre. The most recent Public Health Scotland statistical report said that 631 people were contacted out of the 13,607 that were required to quarantine. Now, we know that the Transport Secretary and Airport Chiefs met earlier this week to discuss this, so will the First Minister commit to introducing a package of support for airport testing, as aviation chiefs ask?
First Minister.
Well, there's two issues here that I think are wrapped up in that question, so I'll briefly take them separately. There's the current approach from Public Health Scotland to contact a sample of those coming into the country every week who are required to quarantine. We set a target of 20% or 450, whichever was the greatest. Last week's reached 631. The Health Secretary has recently announced additional funding for new contact tracers with the aim of contacting up to 2,000 passengers a week from October. So that's under the current system. The second part of the question is there an alternative to quarantine in whole or in part through testing of people coming into the country? We have been discussing that with airports, just as the UK Government has, and we are considering that. To put it bluntly, this is a calculation of the risk of different approaches and the risk we think it is appropriate to take. We know that the incubation period for this virus is 14 days. So if you test somebody coming into the country on day one who tests negative, it doesn't mean they will not test positive a day or 4 days or 14 days later. So you would have to do testing at different points, and not everybody would be captured. That said, to be frank, not everybody is captured by quarantine either. So this is a balance of risk, and those discussions are ongoing. And I would hope that in time, in not too much time, we would have alternatives to quarantine that allowed us to make more use of testing. But we've got to be sure that the arrangements we have in place, whatever they are providing the maximum protection against importation of the virus, which remains one of the significant risks that we face.
Thank you. Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the First Minister for advance sight of her statement. When we started to come out of lockdown, we made clear our view that there must be the agility to pause, to go back, as well as to go forward in this process, and also that there must be transparency in the science to back this up. The science tells us that across much of Scotland, the virus is on the rise again, and that there is no room for complacency. So we support the First Minister's cautionary approach today. But there is something that must concern us all. In Scotland's testing strategy, published just last month, the government said that its target is to have a daily testing capacity of 65,000. Yesterday, only 14,341 tests were carried out. We know that when schools returned a few weeks ago, the testing system in Scotland faced extra pressure and it buckled. So the First Minister can launch a new app today, but at the COVID-19 committee yesterday, Professor Linda Bald warned, and I quote her, "If we can't get rapid testing, we really are in trouble." First Minister, Professor Bald is right, isn't she?
First Minister.
I didn't see the particular comments that Richard Leonard referred to, but as I said yesterday when asked about other comments of Professor Bald, I listened to her very carefully. I think she is one of the many experts we're lucky to have in Scotland who talks a lot of sense, and her advice is always important. In terms, I'm going to try not to be too lengthy or too technical here. The issues Richard Leonard raises are important and very legitimate, and we are working our way through these to make sure that as we go forward, we continue to build both the capacity and the resilience of the testing system. The technical bits, which I won't go into at too much length, is, as I alluded to Ruth Davidson, the large part of our testing system is part of a UK-wide network, and that's the Glasgow Lighthouse Lab and the drive-through centres, and therefore capacity and access to testing is managed across the UK. We are working with the UK to make sure that Scotland's access to capacity is appropriate and fair, and over the past few weeks actually we have probably used more than a population share of that. That is partly because of the rise in demand as our schools went back, which we've seen recede a little bit. And over the last few days, while there will be issues, I know there have been some issues about turnaround time of postal tests, for example. Over the last few days, we have not seen issues with people who need testing in Scotland getting access to that testing, or, as was the case when schools went back, being referred to testing centres that are some distance away. What we have seen, and again this will be a reflection of England's schools going back, is a rise in demand in England that reflected ours when our schools went back, and that's where we have, I don't want to overstate this, I have some concern that we may, when we see rises in demand in England, we may see that impact on Scotland's access to testing, and that's why we continue to work closely with the UK Government on that. But right now and over the last number of days, there hasn't been an issue with people in Scotland who need testing getting rapid access to testing. The figures that Richard Leonard quoted, the actually figures reported yesterday for the day before today's figure, which I appreciate is not published yet, so Richard Leonard couldn't be expected to have it. I think yesterday there was around 17,000 tests carried out. That's tests carried out, not the capacity. Capacity right now, for some of the reasons I've talked about, fluctuates on a daily basis. The target that he referred to is still the one we are looking at. But I can assure Richard Leonard and the Chamber, the Health Secretary and I, look very closely on a daily basis at all of these issues to make sure that people in Scotland who need testing have access to it.
Richard Leonard.
Thank the First Minister for that answer, although I do reflect that the actual number of tests carried out yesterday, or the day before, reported yesterday, is still 50,000 below the target figure. Let me move on to something else, because any new restrictions and any local lockdowns have a significance because they have an impact on all of our lives and well-being. But research shows that Scotland's children and young people, particularly younger children, have found the last 6 months especially hard to cope with. So much so that mental health organisations came together last Friday to unite in warning of the coming mental health crisis. The Scottish Children's Services Coalition forecast that Scotland's children and young people face, in their words, a perfect storm. And they called for, in their words, a national crusade to tackle this. They said that the government needs to work urgently with the relevant authorities to ensure that not only is there sufficient provision available at the local community level, but that this is clearly communicated and easily accessible for young people and their parents or carers. So, First Minister, what urgent action is the government taking to calm this perfect storm?
First Minister.
Thank Richard Leonard for that question. I'll come on to that. I just want to cover off a part of his previous question, just for in the interest of public understanding. The target figure is for capacity, and we are have been deliberately seeking to build a capacity that we will need in winter, so it is much higher than the one that the demand we have right now requires. The figure that Richard Leonard quoted, which he is right, for the day before yesterday, that is the demand figure, and that is demand-led. So it's not it's not accurate right now to compare those two figures. And I know these things are complex, but we have a capacity target that is designed to reflect what we anticipate demand will be in the winter, not necessarily what demand is right now. On the issue of young people and mental health, there are a few more important things in our response to this than catering for the needs of young people. Everybody has found the last 6 months extremely difficult, but there is no group in our population, I think, that has suffered more than young people. They have spent months out of school, away from their friends, often not seeing grandparents for long periods of time. The impact on mental health and well-being has been significant. In terms of what we are doing, firstly, that was why it was so important to get children back to school full-time, and I am pleased that we were able to do that, and I am pleased that so far we have been able to keep schools open, and part of the cautious approach that Richard Leonard has supported is to enable us to keep schools open. We also are mindful of the need to ensure that mental health services are appropriate. We, as many of the members in the Chamber will have commented on and will have had interactions on before, we already had a challenge with child and adolescent mental health services. We were before COVID in a process of redesign and investment in those services. That work continues and of course will now require to make sure that we take account of the effects of COVID. So for example, the commitment to have counsellors in schools is one that will be delivered by next month, and of course we continue to take forward plans for a community wellbeing service more accessible in a preventative sense to young people who require it.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you. And let me come on to children and adolescent mental health services, because I think that is central to this question. The Scottish Children's Services Coalition also warned last week that the COVID-19 restrictions have negatively impacted on young people struggling already with anxiety and depression. They go so far as to warn of a lost generation. But services are still not equipped to deal with the demand that there is. It's now 2 years on from that damning Audit Scotland report into rejected CAMHS referrals, which made 29 critical recommendations to overhaul the system. But the fact is only 7 of those recommendations have been actioned to date. 2 years ago, when that report first came out, I asked the First Minister if she would reform the system of referrals, but it remains largely unreformed, unchanged. And now figures from over the lockdown show a 55% drop in CAMHS referrals. They show that over 1,100 young people have been waiting more than a year for treatment. But they also show that between April and June this year, over 900 referrals to CAMHS were again rejected. This was supposed to have changed. Will the First Minister accept that her government has failed to implement the recommendations of the 2018 CAMHS Audit Scotland report into rejected referrals? Will she accept that they are letting down a whole generation of young people? And on this World Suicide Prevention Day, will she finally, once and for all, put an end to rejected referrals? First Minister.
I do accept there is much more to do here. I will write to Richard Leonard with an update on the progress on and implementation of the recommendations in the report he refers to. Because they are important. Obviously, some of the work that has been or was underway to do that has been disrupted because of COVID, and I'll come on to that in a second, but it remains vital that we take that forward. In terms of the drop in referrals, which is correct, although referrals, I don't have the figures in front of me right now, but I know referrals have started to increase again, but the drop in referrals was largely because of the inability to have face-to-face services during the COVID pandemic. What many health boards have done, and I know Greater Glasgow and Clyde have done particular work around this, is to use, unfortunately, the necessity of reduced referrals to catch up on some of their longer waiting patients. So that work has been done during the pandemic period. The work to reform, we have continued over the past couple of years to invest heavily in CAMHS services. There are more people working in CAMHS services, but fundamentally what we require to do is is reform so that there is more emphasis on prevention and early intervention and less on specialist services, so that specialist services are there for those who need it. That work is underway. It will pick up again as hopefully we come out of the COVID situation. I refer to the counsellors in schools and the wellbeing service. All of that is the vital work we need to do to ensure that the investment we're putting in actually delivers for the young people who need it. Finally, Richard Leonard referred to a quote which I understand the fears that lie behind this of a lost generation. All of us, and me in particular, have a duty, an absolute duty to do everything we can, not just in mental health, but across a whole range of things, to make sure that that phrase does not come to pass and that this generation of young people do not bear the long-term legacy of COVID. And that is a duty and a responsibility that I take very seriously.
Thank you. Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I echo the support that's been expressed for the Protect Scotland app and reassure anyone who hasn't downloaded it already that it's really quick and easy to do. And I encourage everyone to do so. Like everybody across the Chamber and across the country, the Scottish Greens are deeply concerned about the rise in new infections in Scotland. And some experts are warning this could be the start of a second wave. But we mustn't treat it as inevitable. We can stop the rise. To do so, we need to put aside any hint of a blame game and work together. As the First Minister has indicated, this must not be about stigmatising, for example, young people or any other group in the population. It's about providing clear rules and ensuring systems and support are in place so that they can be followed. We saw that the testing system did break down when children returned to school last month, and next week universities will commence their terms. We need to make sure that the same doesn't happen again so that students and staff are kept safe. Can the First Minister confirm how many walk-in testing centres are open and operational in our university towns? And can she reassure students and staff that demand will be met?
Firstly, can I thank Patrick Harvey for his support of Protect Scotland. I am told that since we've been speaking at First Minister's Questions, that another 50,000 people have downloaded it, so it's now over 200,000, which is very positive. Can also endorse his comment that we mustn't treat a continued resurgence of COVID as inevitable. That doesn't mean we should underestimate how difficult it is to keep it under control and drive it further, particularly as we go into the winter. But we must focus on doing that. We mustn't see it as inevitable, that we just have to deal with a second wave. I will, this afternoon, get information to Patrick Harvey. I don't have it in front of me, of the sequence of the walk-in centres that we have committed to have in place over this month, what the order is and the dates that they will open. The one in St Andrews is already open, as I've already indicated. These are part of the overall number of walk-in centres that we are using to try to make access to testing more accessible, but we have, for the reasons Patrick Harvey has spoken about, prioritised areas where there is a university population. One around Glasgow University, I think, is due to open this week and will be followed by others. We also published last week, as members will be aware, updated guidance for further and higher education, which looks at blended learning, arrangements on campus, use of face coverings and also shared accommodation. And I know the universities and colleges themselves take very seriously their responsibility to keep their student populations safe.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful for that answer, and I look forward to any further information the First Minister can provide, because last month we did see some families told to travel halfway across the country to get a test, and it's simply not going to be acceptable if the same thing happens with student populations. But elsewhere in our education system, the teaching union EIS warned yesterday that children with additional support needs currently receiving inadequate support in our schools, particularly those with more complex needs. And this is because staffing levels are simply insufficient for teachers to be able to follow the guidance while providing the close contact and support that these pupils need. One teacher said that in addition to their usual job, teachers are also having to do the enhanced cleaning that's required throughout the day because there are no cleaning staff available. ASN pupils are some of the most vulnerable in our schools. And very often, they suffered the most during lockdown. It simply isn't good enough if they're not getting the support and resources that they need to thrive. So what will the First Minister do today to provide the enhanced staffing that's needed so that teachers can do the best for all pupils with additional support needs in this challenging time?
First Minister.
We have already taken significant action, and I don't underestimate how challenging this is for teachers across our education system. Additional funding, I think from memory, £50 million has been made available to local authorities to help with things like enhanced cleaning. We have also made funding available to increase substantially the number of teachers working in our schools to help with exactly the challenges that Patrick Harvey talks about. We will continue to work very closely through the Education Recovery Group with the EIS and others to make sure that further challenges are properly supported. This is not easy for anybody, and it is not easy for young people or teachers in our schools. One positive thing, which I hope is an indication that the anxiety that many parents, teachers and young people felt as schools went back, and some of the challenges that have inevitably been faced are, if not disappearing, then easing a little bit, is that we're seeing school attendance rising, and the numbers of young people that are absent from school for COVID-related reasons has reduced quite significantly since the first few days of the term. So we keep, and the Education Secretary keeps very close to all of these things as we do everything we can to make sure those working on the front line, whether that's of our education system or our NHS, have the support and the resources that they need.
Thank you. Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
Can I thank the First Minister for advance sight of the statement? We are now facing months more under the thumb of this virus. The First Minister says Test and Protect is working well. But when I asked her in committee yesterday, Professor Linda Bald warned that the test half isn't fully working and is causing concern. She added that if we can't get rapid testing, we really are in trouble. She also said that quarantine is not being followed. Only 1 in 4 people say they fully comply. Does the First Minister really think that what she is doing on testing and quarantining is enough?
First Minister.
No, I don't think that anything, that these things that any of us are doing right now are necessarily enough. That's why we continue to support, expand and build resilience of these systems. I think Test and Protect is working well, and I think the evidence is there to support that. The test part of Test and Protect, as I was talking in detail about to Ruth Davidson, is part of a networked UK system. There are aspects of that that we require to cooperate with the UK government to ensure that any challenges are overcome and any concerns are addressed. I do have a concern, I don't want to overstate this, that rising demand in other parts of the UK could have an impact on capacity or turnaround times in Scotland, but we work and will continue to work through those. We're all trying to achieve the same things, and we will continue to work constructively with other governments across the UK in expanding testing, both in terms of capacity resilience and also new technology that allows testing to be done in a different way and much more rapidly. We've procured here in Scotland already tests that are done much more quickly at point of care. So these things are important on an ongoing basis. The Protect part of Test and Protect is probably working even better in the numbers that are published, and again, we are not complacent about these, and this is where I think Scotland is doing perhaps a bit better than some other parts of the UK. We are seeing well over 90% of contacts traced, well over 90% of index cases traced, and well over 90% of contacts. On quarantine, I accept the challenges around quarantine, both in terms of the challenges for the travelling public and airports and airlines, but also the challenges of any system of being absolutely watertight and foolproof. And therefore, we have to look at both how we tighten that up and look at alternative ways, and we continue to do that. None of this is straightforward, none of this is easy, but it is all important to try to keep this virus under control. What I would say, and it relates back to Patrick Harvey's comment, is that we should be very vigilant about the situation we're in right now. We should be very cautious. We should hear the warning signs very loudly. But we should also reflect on the progress we have made since the earlier part of the year. We are in a stronger position, and that hopefully means if we all, government especially, do the right things and the public all, as they have done so well, get behind all of the public health advice, then we don't have to accept the inevitability of what might otherwise happen. We can all have an impact in keeping it under control.
Will you ready?
I would urge the First Minister to read the full transcript of yesterday's committee, because the Professor Bald was very concerned about the first half of Test and Protect and the testing capacity and the testing utilisation. And she also was very concerned about the quarantine aspects as well, because as we've seen from this week's figures, over 800 people have now been missed by the quarantine spot checks. And when 1 in 4 are not complying, that is a real concern. We are turning a dark corner in people's hopes and expectations. In people's minds, we were preparing for recovery, for the elimination of the virus. Now we're being taken back. So I was very concerned about what Professor Bald also said yesterday, that when she warned about social unrest, I was very concerned about that. So can the First Minister say what plans she has on that front and how she will avoid that social unrest?
First Minister.
Can I say, firstly, before I come on to those comments, and all of us as elected politicians should see it as part of our duty to avoid social unrest and take the responsibility to explain and encourage the public to do the right things very seriously, and I think everybody across the chamber does that. On the issues of testing and quarantine, I am not blind to the challenges there at all. I take these things very seriously. With the test part of Test and Protect, we do, because of the way the system is structured, require to work with the UK government. That sometimes makes those challenges more difficult, but it is nevertheless the right thing to do to make sure we have that system operating across the whole of the UK. And on quarantine, one point actually that I don't think is fully understood about quarantine, although I accept its limitations and I accept the desirability of having alternative approaches, is that every single person who comes into the country who's required to quarantine, 100% of them are contacted by email. The phone call follow-up is the sample bit of that, so there is contact with everyone. But yes, we have to work hard to make the systems that we have in place to mitigate this all the more effective. Can I say, elimination is still and must still be our objective. Elimination is not a fixed point in time. We have always said we will go backwards and forwards as we come out of lockdown. It's not the same as eradication, which will only happen with a virus. But the reason we are being cautious again today is that we must continue to bear down on the rates of infection. What elimination means is that you drive it as low as possible and you don't simply accept a certain level is okay to circulate. So sometimes it will be higher than others, but the objective of driving it as low as possible remains absolutely essential. I will read the full transcript of Linda Ball, since it's been mentioned a couple of times, and as I said before, she's somebody I've got a huge amount of respect for. I think the point here is that as we go further through this pandemic, it gets harder for the public to follow all of this advice. It gets harder for all of us. I think every single one of us can identify with this. And therefore, the duty on all of us as politicians, principally me, and I accept that, is to explain as clearly as possible why we're asking people to do certain things and what the reasons for that is. And also to, where necessary, have enforcement in place, where people who are flagrantly breaching the law have consequences of that. If you're having a house party of several hundred people, for example. So that is important to make sure people understand we're not putting these restrictions on anybody for no reason. It is for good reason. And as we get further into this, the messages become more complex inevitably and people get more fatigued, which is why it's more important than ever that we continue to patiently and fully explain the reasons why all of this remains vital.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take all the supplementary questions after question 7. Question number 5, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to support victims of domestic abuse in light of reports of increased incidents during the COVID-19 pandemic.
First Minister.
I have expressed, like many people before, my deep concern about the greater risk to women and children of domestic abuse during the pandemic, and would again make a plea to anyone suffering domestic abuse to seek the help that is there. Police Scotland continues to prioritise domestic abuse cases, and we are focused on ensuring that frontline services continue to provide support. We've allocated an additional £1.5 million to Women's Aid and other frontline services, and also recently published a new online resource for those working in housing, social work, health, education and other sectors to know where to direct people to for further assistance. And we, of course, remain committed to implementing the Equally Safe strategy, and will bring forward legislation on domestic abuse protection orders within this Parliament.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the First Minister for that answer, and I do want to turn to the Domestic Abuse Bill. Women who are experiencing abuse often have to make a devastating choice between staying in the home with the perpetrator or making themselves and their children homeless to get away from abuse. One way of giving women much-needed breathing space in these situations is through emergency protective orders. Can the First Minister outline how the new Domestic Abuse Bill will give police and courts powers to ban domestic abusers from victims' homes?
First Minister.
The bill will provide new powers to impose restrictions on a suspected perpetrator of domestic abuse, including removing them from a home they share with a person at risk and prohibiting them from contacting or otherwise abusing the person at risk while the order is in effect. The bill will also facilitate processes for changes to be made to social housing tenancy agreements to help victims stay in their own home, by giving powers to remove perpetrators from tenancy agreements. Too often in the past and currently, it is the victim of abuse that is faced with losing their home rather than the perpetrator, and we need to change that. These measures are intended to provide protection for the person at risk and enable them to take steps to address their longer-term safety and housing without them becoming homeless in order to protect themselves. So I hope these measures, which of course still have to have the full scrutiny of Parliament, will help considerably to protect those who are most at risk of domestic abuse.
Thank you. Question number 6, Graham Simpson.
To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is helping airports to survive during the COVID-19 pandemic.
First Minister.
The global downturn in aviation caused by COVID has had a significant impact on airports and airlines around the world, including here. We've provided support to the sector within the powers available to us. Airports and ground handling companies have been granted 100% non-domestic rates relief this year. And of course, we've also called on the UK Government to extend the job retention scheme to help the aviation industry through the winter season. Our immediate focus is on helping airports recover their route networks to maximise the potential for a return to connectivity and employment. And we will also do everything we can to help airports secure new routes. And of course, there's a good record in Scotland in that. In 2019, Scotland was better connected than ever before. It will take time for demand to return. Indeed, it will take time for us to recommend that people travel as they did before. But we will continue in the meantime to do what we can to help the sector recover.
Graham Simpson.
Thanks for that answer. Over the past week, I've spoken to airport bosses at Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen. They've painted a dire picture where thousands of jobs could be at risk, and Scotland certainly won't be connected to the world. They're crying out for help, and as the First Minister knows, they want an airport testing regime that could reduce the need to quarantine. I've also spoken to the wider travel sector. Barhead Travel told me Scotland risks losing an industry that contributes £1.7 billion to our economy and employs over 25,000 people. Now, Ruth Davidson mentioned figures earlier that showed that less than 5% of those people arriving in Scotland last week who were required to quarantine have been contacted by the National Contact Tracing Centre. Surely, if we tested everyone on arrival, then we'd have 100% contact and we could potentially reduce the need for quarantine. Isn't 100% contact better than less than 5%, First Minister?
First Minister.
As I said to Willie Rennie, there is 100% contact with people coming into the country subject to quarantine. They are all contacted by email, and then there is a sample contact by telephone of others. And of course, there is the ability for Public Health Scotland to involve the police if there is concerns about flagrant breach. On the issue of testing on day one, if you took an approach that simply tested people on day one coming into the country, yes, you may test 100% of people, but you would let into the country after that a significant percentage who actually had COVID. but because they were at an early stage in the incubation period, tested negative in the test. The test, unfortunately, doesn't. So we can test, and what has been explored is the ability to test at day one and then later on. Now, you will still not capture everybody, and therefore there are some careful judgments about balance of risk that we have to take, because we cannot simply be sanguine and shrug our shoulders about people coming into the country with COVID. Now, what I'd say to Graham Simpson, I think he'll find that there's not as much disagreement between us on this as he perhaps thinks. But if this was as simple as he is making it out to be, then presumably his colleagues in the UK government would already have done this. But they haven't done it for the same reasons that the Scottish Government hasn't yet done this. These are complex issues, both in terms of public health and in terms of logistics and efficacy and practicality. So we are all working through these issues as carefully and as quickly as we can. I think we all want to get to a position where there's a better alternative to quarantine. But as I say, if it was as easy as the member makes out, then perhaps other governments that he's perhaps more favourable to than this one would have found the way to do it, and they haven't.
Question number 7, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the First Minister for what reason the Scottish Government is delaying the ban on placing homeless households into unsuitable accommodation, which announced in May 2020.
First Minister.
We remain very committed to extending the unsuitable accommodation order to all homeless households in this parliamentary term, effectively ending the use of B&Bs as temporary accommodation other than in emergency situations. Temporary exemptions were created in May, which allowed for placements in hotels and B&Bs where needed, and that has effectively kept people off the streets and in safe and secure accommodation during the pandemic. We're extending these exemptions until the end of January, given the ongoing challenges we still face, and we recognise the challenges local authorities are facing as a result of the pandemic, where supplies of suitable temporary accommodation have been limited due to restrictions to the turnover of void properties as a result of lockdown. This decision was reached with the support of councils who remain focused on ensuring people have somewhere safe and warm to live.
Pauline McNeill.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, and I'm sure that she will agree that people who are experiencing homelessness are in a state of crisis compounded when they are in unsuitable accommodation, hostels or bed and breakfast, and that research shows that those residents, in relation to their physical and mental health, their sense of safety, their ability to maintain a normal life, including cooking for themselves and accessing laundry facilities, makes life very difficult. And so we wholeheartedly welcomed the decision to extend the 7-day restriction spent in unsuitable accommodation to all people to ensure that all homeless people are treated equally. I accept what the First Minister says about the challenges in today's world, but I would like just a guarantee or a firm commitment that she can give that as soon as practically possible in January that timetable will not slip unless there's another good reason in order to do so. Thank you very much.
First Minister.
I've already said we are very committed to doing this within this parliamentary term. Given the circumstances we're in just now, it would not be responsible of me to say that without any caveat. I 100% agree with Pauline McNeill on this. Permanent settled accommodation is always better in normal times than B&B and temporary accommodation. But in this pandemic situation, because of some of the wider factors we've had to deal with, often it is access to the B&B and temporary accommodation that is the difference from somebody being on the streets and not safe. So we have to see this relative situation given those circumstances. Hopefully by January we will be in a better position. The commitment is there and it is strong. But in this situation we have to be aware of the uncertainties, and we have to recognise that the most important thing of all is to ensure that during a pandemic people are not on the streets. And if that means in these unique circumstances, that is in B&B or temporary accommodation, that is better than on the streets. In normal times, settled accommodation is always the best, and that is what we continue to aim for.
We'll move on to supplementary questions. John Mason to be followed by Edward Mountain.
Thank you. I think the First Minister may be aware of Glasgow Rocks, who are Scotland's leading basketball team and are based in my constituency. They're very worried at the moment about whether elite players will have to come in through quarantine and also when spectators can come back. Can she offer them any reassurance?
First Minister.
Obviously, we'd be happy to engage directly with them about specific concerns they have and what the reasons for that are. I think, and I'm fairly sure actually, Sport Scotland have already been in contact with Glasgow Rocks and provided them with details of our resumption of performance sport guidance. As I say, there is an offer of more specific support via the Institute of Support to ensure that all the necessary protocols are in place. If there are more specific issues that they want further guidance on, we'd be happy to facilitate that. And I'm sure we all wish the team every success once the season resumes.
Edward Mountain to be followed by Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you'll be aware that 37 people in Granton-on-Spey have tested positive for COVID-19, including a care home worker. At the outset, given the concerns of staff and residents, and at their request, I contacted the Cabinet Secretary for Health, and she confirmed that the tests carried out in this care home were being diverted to Raigmore for analysis. However, the Director of Public Health of NHS Highland confirmed that NHS Highland could not actually analyse the types of tests which had been diverted to them. First Minister, can you explain why the Scottish Government, please, diverted tests to a lab that could not analyse them, and indeed subsequently lost them, requiring a complete retesting and subsequent delays? And can you please give me an undertaking that you will personally investigate these issues, because they don't give me or the residents of Granton the confidence in the test and protect system which we should have, especially as NHS Highland this morning not only dispatched incomplete testing kits to the care home, it required the care home to go back to Raigmore to pick up more.
First Minister.
I will absolutely have the Health Secretary look into the specific issues that are raised. I'm not aware of the particular problems around testing. What I do know is that the local teams in Granton and Spey have been working very hard and I think very effectively to make sure that this cluster of cases is kept under control. The cluster now is 37 cases, that's certainly the last information I had, most of them linked to the local abattoir and just 2 cases in the wider community. Now, I don't dismiss the kind of challenges that the member raises and we will look into them, but actually those figures are a real tribute to Test and Protect, stopping a workplace cluster seeping into the wider community, and my thanks go to everybody who has helped achieve that so far.
Elaine Smith to be followed by David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last month, the Minister for Public Health said that independent dentists were being encouraged to follow the spirit of the route map, but constituents tell me it's still the case that those who can afford private dental care have access to a wide range of treatments unavailable to NHS patients. So does the First Minister agree with me that private patients are not at less of a risk to themselves or to dental staff than NHS patients? And as such, will the First Minister review her advice on dental health to ensure that people are not left suffering simply because they can't afford to pay for private treatment?
First Minister.
In summary, yes. Of course, since the answer that the Public Health Minister gave, there has been, I think, if I got the timing of that right, movement in what NHS dentists are able to offer in terms of services. So aerosol generating procedures for urgent care are now possible. In terms of dentists delivering private care, there is a different relationship between them and the Scottish Government, but we absolutely encourage them, and the National Clinical Director, of course, with a dentistry background, has encouraged them to comply with the guidance set out for the dental profession. The Chief Dental Officer has worked very hard with the profession generally. Our focus is on, as quickly and as soon as it is safely possible, to allow people access to the fullest possible range of dental services on the NHS. Throughout the pandemic, of course, there have been a number of emergency centres across the country that have allowed people access for urgent and emergency care. If I've not covered every aspect of the question in my answer, I will ask the Minister for Public Health to write to the member with a fuller update of what is now possible and what we hope to make possible in the coming weeks.
David Torrance to be followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What assurances can the First Minister give users of the new Test and Protect Act that their contact information will be held securely and that privacy will be respected at all times?
First Minister.
Okay, I'm getting a running commentary on download from the Deputy First Minister here, who tells me we've now passed 250,000 people in Scotland who have signed up to the app, which is fantastic, and my thanks to everybody. And if you're amongst those who haven't, please do so. Privacy and confidentiality has been absolutely the centre of the development of this app. So in summary, I'm not a technical expert. The app doesn't track your location. It basically generates random codes that tell whether you've been in contact with someone within the 2 metres for 15 minutes or more. Those codes are only retained for, I think, 14 days, but they allow people to be notified. There is no passing on of data. There is very minimal data actually collected by the app. And of course, if you are told that you have been in close contact with somebody who has tested positive, you have no idea who that person is, and the person who tests positive, when they put their testing code into the app, they don't know the people that will then be notified. So there's anonymity, confidentiality and privacy built into it, and I think that is really important assurance for people.
Alexander Stewart, to be followed by Alec Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, the Scottish Government announced that it was unable to agree financial support to outdoor education centres, and as a result, closures may now well be inevitable. For many young people, these breaks were often the only opportunity to enjoy life-enhancing experiences. This could also result in loss of employment in rural areas where jobs are at a premium. Therefore, will the First Minister and her government reconsider this stance and commit to investing in these facilities, which will help ensure the health and mental well-being of young people going forward during this COVID-19 crisis?
First Minister.
I absolutely agree with the value of outdoor education centres and the importance of the work that they do. It is regrettable that because of public health advice, the services that they are able to offer, overnight services, are still limited. It's important to say, though, that many organisations with outdoor education centres are in the third sector, so they have been able to supply for support through the Third Sector Resilience Fund. Education centres can also access financial support through the UK Government's job retention scheme, and hopefully that will be continued. We will continue to work with the sector. We funded the Scottish Advisory Panel for Outdoor Education to develop guidance for schools and councils on day visits to outdoor centres. Guidance was published mid-August, I think, because we're trying to work with the sector to maximise what they can do and what they can offer, which of course is a way of ensuring maximum income. But we absolutely understand the importance of this and will continue to work with the sector to provide whatever support is possible.
Alec Rowley, to be followed by Kenneth Goose.
Presiding Officer, I certainly don't underestimate the gravity of the COVID situation or the difficult decisions and judgments that are having to be made. And I would want to acknowledge the good communication that we have had in Scotland over this period. But I want to focus on the retail sector. When we began to have the lockdown in retail, the social distancing, a lot of retailers were counting the numbers of people going into shops, but that is starting to slip in some areas, and it's worrying a lot of people. On social media yesterday, I saw one gentleman who I recognise, and I know he has underlying health issues, saying he was in his local co-op, there was no social distancing, and people were not wearing masks. I've experienced that myself. So my question is, will the government talk to the retail sector and talk about how we have to remain vigilant and protect people? And finally, I've talked to a lot of shop workers who are on the front line when it comes to this, and they're saying that their employers are not enforcing social distancing, and therefore they feel at risk.
I think Alec Rowley is right to raise the concern. I sort of recognised earlier on in my statement the enormous amount of work the hospitality sector has done to try to ensure that they are providing safe spaces for people. I think it's also appropriate for me to recognise the enormous amount of work that I know the retail sector has done, and I'm very grateful for that. I think people working in I'll come back to people working in shops in a second, because I don't want this to be necessarily directed at shop workers. But I think generally businesses, like individuals, the longer we go through this, the harder it is to comply with all of this. And I think I understand that, but it also gets more important. And I've heard anecdotes, I've had emails sent to me of systems that were put in place at the outset, one-way systems, for example, that retail is not doing now. Now, retail shops are of different shapes and sizes. They have to put in place the systems that work for them. But there is guidance in place for sectors across our economy, and we expect these sectors to comply with that guidance. And we will, in direct response to the question Alec Rowley asked me, we will continue to engage with retail to make sure that that guidance is properly being applied in shops across the country. In terms of shop workers, they are on the front line. You know, the job they do is very different to people in the front line of our public services, but they are on the front line and they are more exposed to this virus than many of the rest of us, and therefore we have a particular duty to help keep them safe. And those that they work for have a duty to keep them safe, and the public have a duty to help keep them safe, which is why I would appeal to the public: make sure you're wearing your face covering, make sure you're taking responsibility for physical distancing as well, and don't be given any grief to shop workers who are asking you to do these things, because they are doing their job and they're doing it responsibly. I keep coming back to this point. I don't want this to sound, you know, saccharine and cliched, but if we're going to get through this, and we will get through this, it takes the effort of all of us. This is the time in my life, the only time I can remember, where actually it is true to say that none of us can cope alone here. It's the collective efforts of all of us that will determine how successfully and how quickly we get through this. So every single one of us has a part to play, and I appeal to everybody. This is all an enormous pain in the neck, but it is really important to keep everybody, including shop workers, safe. So let's at this moment all resolve to just tighten up our compliance with all of this, and if we do that, then we will get through it more quickly.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Peter Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, whilst the priority remains minimising infection and saving lives, when it comes to post-travel quarantine, can it be done differently? If there's a viral spike in one part of an overseas country, is it necessary to impose a blanket quarantine on all travellers from it? Quarantining folk from Mallorca because of an outbreak in Madrid makes no more sense than locking down Shetland because of infections in Stranraer. A broad brush approach increases uncertainty, damages our travel industry, ruins holidays and deters visitors from family and loved ones living overseas. Will the Scottish Government therefore consider a more nuanced and flexible approach to quarantine?
First Minister.
Yes, we consider that. We look on a weekly basis at the data that comes from principally the Joint Biosecurity Centre, which gives data to the 4 UK nations. And we also look increasingly at the data that comes through Test and Protect, which is, as well as trying to keep us all safe, is also a really rich and getting richer source of information about exactly where the risks are coming from. So we will always try to be as effective as possible in as proportionate a way as possible, but it is really important that we take steps that can effectively minimise the risk of importation of the virus. If you take Greece, for example, a couple of weeks ago when we took the decision to put quarantine requirements on people coming back from Greece. We did that largely because Test and Protect was telling us that literally dozens of people who had tested positive in Scotland reported recent travel in Greece. So we were able to act there. I think we acted rightly, and if the data allows it, we will be able to target these measures more effectively. This is really difficult for everybody, and it's particularly difficult for the aviation sector. I absolutely understand that, but right now, and I'm sorry if this sounds really basic, this is a global pandemic. It is globally an accelerating pandemic. And therefore, it gives me no pleasure to say this, but my advice to people right now has to be to think very carefully about non-essential foreign travel, given the gravity of the situation that the world is facing. And hopefully, before too long, that advice will change. But right now, we have a duty as government to try to minimise the risks of this virus spreading, and one of the biggest risks we face is importation from elsewhere in the world. So these decisions are difficult. We will try to make them as proportionate as possible, but our most important obligation is to keep people as safe as possible.
Peter Chapman, to be followed by David Stewart.
Presiding Officer, an article in the Times newspaper on Tuesday reported that a Scottish Government delegation in Brussels suggested to EU officials that UK negotiators should make concessions to the EU on fishing rights in the Brexit talks. I am sure the First Minister will realise that, if true, this significantly weakens the UK negotiating position and could therefore result in a much poorer outcome for our fishermen. Can the First Minister confirm or deny that this conversation took place as reported?
First Minister.
I and anybody in the Scottish Government have never tried to undermine the negotiations the UK is having with the European Union, even if we wanted to, which we don't. We wouldn't have to, because the UK is doing such a good job of undermining these negotiations themselves. I mean, I really would ask the member to reflect on what has transpired over the past couple of days. The UK Government has just published a bill that they admit breaks international law. They are trashing the United Kingdom's international reputation, and frankly, it is disgraceful. What this story sounds to me like, actually, is the UK Government preparing the ground to sell out yet again Scotland's fishing industry and look for somebody else to blame. Well, when and if they do sell out Scotland's fishing industry, the only people to blame will be the Tories in the UK Government.
David Stewart to be followed by Alice Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be well aware that those with diabetes face a significantly higher risk of dying from COVID-19, with 1 in 3 of all coronavirus hospital deaths being associated with the condition. Will the First Minister join with me in welcoming the UK trial Arcadia, where preclinical research has suggested that the glucose kinase activator could aid those with diabetes who contract COVID-19?
Yes, I do warmly welcome that and wish that research and that trial every success. The member is right to raise specific concerns around people with diabetes and the specific risk factor that appears to be presented there, and the good work that has been done to try to tackle that. Can I just take the opportunity, though, to praise scientists and experts and clinicians right across the country who are trying to develop the scientific solutions to COVID. I am hugely optimistic that in time science will provide us with a way out of this through better treatments and ultimately, hopefully, a vaccine. And you know, those working on this, we've got some of the best people in Scotland is more than playing its part. We've got some of the best brains in the world here in Scotland and the UK working on this, and they deserve our full support. And while they are doing their bit to work on this, all of the rest of us have to do our bit right now to keep the virus under control.
Alice Cole-Hamilton to be followed by Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The City of Edinburgh Council is about to use government spaces for people money to impose sweeping changes on the communities of East Craigs and Craigmount in my constituency, affecting 3,500 homes. The Council have avoided any meaningful consultation through the use of temporary traffic regulation orders, despite stating openly that they are likely to become permanent. So keen were they to be heard that 1,000 residents recently attended a public meeting with the transport convener that I organised. These are not car enthusiasts, they are normal people, and had the city asked them, they would have made it clear that these plans will actually lengthen essential car journeys and put huge additional pressure on arterial routes. So can I ask the First Minister, given that a court in Berlin struck down similar proposals stating they were a misuse of the emergency, is she content that the council administration is acting lawfully and in the spirit of the government funds for community social distancing?
First Minister.
Happy to look into the specific in more detail, and I absolutely believe that local people should be properly consulted and listened to about local schemes. But you know, Alec Cole-Hamilton is one of these people who regularly comes to this chamber and talks to me about the need for greater localism and decentralisation and the need to do more to tackle climate change. So perhaps he should also reflect on that. But of course, he's right to voice the interests of his constituents, and I'm sure and hope Edinburgh Council will listen and take them seriously.
Christine Graham, followed by Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following a raid in my constituency when 300 attended, the police had to use the criminal law to charge the organisers of such events. However, in England and Wales, under their coronavirus regulations, fines of up to £10,000 can be levied on those organising. Given that money is the motive and not a thought for public health, hitting the culprits where it hurts in the pocket seems an excellent idea, actually something I trailed at the COVID committee yesterday, and it was favourably received by Professor Bald and Michael Clancy. So will the Scottish Government consider introducing similar measures here?
First Minister.
Two sort of contextual points. Firstly, there are criminal proceedings underway in the specific case, so I won't comment directly on that. Secondly, as Christine Graham knows, as a former lawyer and with a long experience in the Justice Committee, we have different structures of fines and fixed penalty notices in Scotland, and we've tried to fit the coronavirus system into those existing systems, and they are different here than in England. But yes, we will continue to look at whether we can use greater fines and greater enforcement. But I think in cases where there is a flagrant and egregious breach of the law, then it is right that the full force of the criminal law is brought to bear on people who do that. Because right now, they're not just breaking the law, they are putting lives at risk. And let's not lose sight of this. It is still the case that all of us, in small ways and in large ways, need to act in a way that saves lives. This virus kills people, and every time we allow it to spread, potentially somebody's life is at risk. So let's all make sure that we abide by the regulations. The vast majority are, and Christine Graham is right, where people, not inadvertently or because they make a mistake, everybody will do that from time to time, but where people are just flouting the law with no regard to people's safety or human life, then I think the full force of the law should be brought to bear on them.
And Maurice Corrie.
Presiding Officer, on Thursday last week we celebrated the Merchant Navy Day with the Red Ensign being flown on many buildings throughout the United Kingdom, and then celebrated Sea Sunday at the weekend. 95% of the world's goods are transported by sea. The British Merchant Navy plays a huge part in this with its ships and crews, and former seafarers are a significant part of our veterans community here in Scotland. Would the First Minister join me in recognising and thanking our British Merchant Navy crews, ship owners and ship managers for the vital work they do in crewing and operating our ships worldwide, particularly with the extended crewing situation on the schedules being experienced during the current COVID pandemic in order to keep our supplies moving 24/7?
First Minister.
In short, yes, I fully join with the member in paying tribute to our Merchant Navy crews, ship owners, operators and all those who work so hard to provide and deliver these services. They are important for the reasons the member has set out, and like all of the rest of us, what they do has been made more difficult because of the circumstances we are living through. So my gratitude goes to them for playing their part in helping keep the country going through these most difficult of times.
Thank you very much. Apologies to members who we didn't manage to reach. We're going to suspend and resume at 2:45. 2:45 this afternoon. This meeting is suspended.